Let me put it this way. Her book is so good it disgusted me. Does that make sense? As a pro-gun advocate, as a gun rights activist, when I read this book, the madder I got, the more disgusted I got, meant the book was getting better and better and better. If you haven't read the book yet, you need to read the book. Let me give you an example, then we're going to go to Emily Miller. These are the requirements in Washington, D.C. This is what Emily Miller had to go through. Number 1, fill out the Statement of Eligibility form. Number 2, find a D.C. certified instructor for a gun safety class. Number 3, take 4 hours of classroom instruction and 1 hour of range instruction, plus get the instructor to fill out a compliance form. Are you listening to me, Iowa? Number 4, provide proof that my vision is good. Number 5, provide proof of residency. My driver's license would work for steps 4 and 5, but the majority of Washingtonians who use public transportation have to get a vision test and collect documentation of residency. Are you listening to me, Michigan? 6, buy 2 passport photos. Number 7, study D.C.'s laws and regulations for firearms. Florida, are you paying attention to this? Alabama, Texas, are you paying attention to this? Number 8, take a 20-question multiple-choice test. Number 9, get fingerprinted. Number 10, pay a government fee. Number 11, buy the gun. Number 12, transfer the gun through Sykes. Number 13, Illinois, are you paying attention to me? Have Sykes fill out the section in the application for the firearms registration certificate, and I'll let Emily Miller tell us about 14, 15, 16, and 17. Emily, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. My mind is blown.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me, Mark.
I don't understand it. The more I read the book, the angrier I got, and I thought, you have done a knockout job with Emily Gets Her Gun. I was anticipating it, and when I got into it, I was absolutely blown away.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'll tell you, the reason I wrote this book is because you sort of gave a just brief synopsis there of the 4 months it took me to get a legal gun registered in D.C. that I can't take out of my house. And soon after that, Obama won a second term and decided that these kinds of laws should apply to the whole country. So in my book, as you said, I explain what it took for me to get a gun in D.C., and then I go through all the things that have happened in this country in the past 9 months that Obama has pushed this with his money man, Mike Bloomberg. Around the country, same things, whether it's so-called assault weapons ban, high-capacity magazines, all these things they're doing. And I think I see what I went through. It took 4 months for me to get a legal gun to keep at home. And you know how this has affected crime? Not at all. In fact, crime is up in D.C. Assaults with a gun were up 20% last year. And so the criminals are getting the guns. The good people like me can't get guns, and we're just being harassed. And so I wrote this book because I want to wake people up. And, for example, as you talked about and you cover so much, the Colorado recall, and everyone, we're all so excited about that recall election, but what if people had known before the law was passed, before those bills were passed into law, how this would affect their lives? D.C. is an example of everything that President Obama and Mike Bloomberg want put into place around the country exists here.
Let's talk about that, Emily. You do a wonderful job here. Let me lay out really the outline for the book. You start off, you alternate, don't you? You go between This was my experience, and then you hit current events in politics nationwide. Then this is my experience in the next chapter, and you alternate. It makes for fascinating reading. And I went through this thing. I couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
I could not. I fell asleep with it twice, woke up and continued reading.
So we're sleeping together now, Mark?
I'm telling you what, me and your book, it's amazing. I have so many quotes, Emily, highlighted in here that I don't know that we're going to have time to get to all of them because every one of them is so pertinent. And what's important about this, and I want my listeners to understand this when they read it themselves before they get the book, that it doesn't matter where you live. As long as you live outside the Beltway of D.C., anywhere across this country, this book is going to smack you with reality, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I did it the way I did it. Every other chapter is Capitol Hill, what happened this year in Capitol Hill. One chapter is on Mike Bloomberg. One chapter is on liberal media. One chapter is on misleading language they use, the gun grabbers use. And then the middle chapter is the process it took for me to get a gun, culminating in some stories of veterans who were horribly treated and thrown in jail for violating these laws. So that when I wrote a chapter explaining what this high-capacity magazine law that they were trying to pass in the Senate, they passed in Colorado, they passed in New York, it passed in New Jersey and Maryland and all these places around the country. Then I go through what it took for me when the next chapter, I wanted a SIG. My .229 SIG came with a 13-round magazine. So then I couldn't get it. It literally could not be transferred to our one gun dealer in D.C. because he cannot accept it with a 13-round magazine.
Right.
So I had to spend all this extra money and time to find a dealer who would switch out the 13-round mag with the 10-round mag, which somehow makes the city safer. I mean, it's just silly. And so it just I wanted to get a lot of facts in, but I also wanted for people to understand what this means in real life. Why, as you know so well, one thing is true about gun control law. It has never reduced crime.
Not anywhere it's been tried. Not anywhere it's been tried.
Zero. And no government study, no Harvard study has ever said differently. But what I think sometimes people don't understand is the common senseness of it. We can talk about studies, but let's talk about common sense. Common sense is, should the police be pursuing people like me whose magazine has 13 rounds in it, or should they be pursuing the criminals, the real criminals? That's why gun control doesn't work, because this is the real-life effects of it.
And one of the most important quotes in your book, I want to go back to the language with you in just a minute, particularly the term common sense. That's a term that I believe that the left has hijacked, that the anti-gunners have hijacked, and they've been very effective at hijacking those common sense gun regulations. The most telling quote out of your book, and there are a gazillion I could have pulled, in the whole 4 months that I went through the gun registration process, you say, this was the one time that I wanted to give up on the idea. I couldn't find any way to take this mandatory class in a way that didn't scare me. If I hadn't been doing this so publicly in our newspaper, I would have waved the white flag and given Washington politicians the win and stayed just another unarmed, vulnerable person in a city with increasing violent crime. I have to go here. Please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but this is the ultimate goal with this incredible, ridiculous, ludicrous process that they're putting you through, is to hopefully make you give up.
Absolutely. That is the point. The point is to stop people from getting guns. And it's just now, look at Maryland. It's just as bad. That's why they're all racing to get guns right now. They're putting in place the same exact class. That is the one thing, and I had to admit to my readers, was the one thing I wanted to give up at that point, because it was so hard for me to find a class in a way, this 5-hour class where you just learn the laws. There's nothing about training or fundamentals or safety or anything like that, because all it was, the police department gives you a list of names, 47 I counted, with phone numbers, all men, that's it. No affiliation, no companies, no safety, no addresses. I'm just calling these random men. And by the way, they all teach the class out of their houses. And the D.C. police, in order for me to register my gun, requires I take this class from one of these people. I don't know who they are. So I'm supposed to go to an armed man's house, tell him I'm unarmed, to take this class. In the end, through my series, the city council did away with it because of this obvious bias against law-abiding people and women in particular. But now, neighboring Maryland, they're reenacting it, and starting October 1st, people have to take the 5-hour class with them.
I think it's vital that Americans around the country who can exercise their Second Amendment rights understand what those of us who can't have to go through, that this fight is far from over, Emily, as you know. In fact, it's just beginning. I don't even know where to start here, so I'm just going to pick a spot in the middle of it because I have the whole 3 pages highlighted. No, as I told you, I don't have the gun yet, I said, referring to you. You're not going to do anything until I get the 219 from Charles Sykes. He needs to fill this out to start the process, she answered, she being a police officer. And by the way,
she being a police officer.
A police officer.
In the registry office.
Why? I asked, exasperated. That's the process, she said. I pulled out the registration packet's list of instructions and held it up in front of me. It doesn't say that in here. It doesn't say you have to do these things in order, but it's the process, she replied. But it doesn't say that anywhere, I insisted. You're going to go to Sykes and get this all filled out, she said. If it's nothing, because I need to check your gun to be sure we can approve your weapon. Approve my weapon? That was the first I'd heard of that step. Emily, this is absolutely insane.
Trust me, I sat there, and every time I went into that police registry office, I kept my mini tape recorder on in my bag, right, being the investigative reporter that I am. And I listened back to that, and I was so angry afterwards. I was so angry in the moment that if she had not been a police officer, I think I would have screamed at her.
How many times did you have to go? Ladies and gentlemen, listen to this. This is to be able to exercise your Second Amendment right in the nation's capital. How many times do you have to go to your local police department to buy a gun? Now, Emily, let me ask you this. How many times did you, in Washington, have to show up at this police department, this registration bureau?
If I'm thinking back correctly, it was 4 or 5 times.
4 or 5 times you had to go to the police to buy a gun.
And also, just to keep in mind, D.C. is now the last place in the country where you don't have the right to bear arms, so you have half of your Second Amendment recognized. Since Illinois' carry laws were overturned recently, D.C. is now the only place you can't kick you out of the house. So for people who hear this story around the country, they think this is to get a carry permit. This is to buy a gun and keep it at home only.
This is to own the gun. This is to own the weapon.
Yeah.
You refer in the book to Sykes, and I mentioned the name Sykes when I was going through these quotes. Tell America who Sykes is and how important this Mr. Sykes is to being able to exercise your Second Amendment, because without this man, Mr. Sykes, no Washington resident can buy a gun, can they?
Right. Well, after the Supreme Court Heller decision in 2008, and the city was forced to give up its 30-year gun ban, they put in all these laws, all these ridiculous laws, all these rules like you're reading in my book of what you have to do to get a gun. Charles Sykes is the one gun dealer in D.C. And he doesn't buy and he doesn't sell. He just transfers. And obviously, there's no – I'm sorry to say it to sound obvious, but there are no gun stores in D.C., the zoning issue. So obviously your handgun is from out of state, so you have to transfer it to someone in D.C. So what the city tried to do last summer is Sykes lost his lease, and they came to him and they said, you can only get a new lease. And again, he transfers guns. He doesn't buy or sell. But in order to find one, you have to find one that's not within 100 yards of a school, a government building, a church, a library, an office building, an apartment building, a house. So think of Washington, D.C., and think of what is not in 100 yards of anything, right?
Well, you refer to it as a tightly packed city that makes it impossible.
It's impossible. It was impossible. So he went out of business for 3 months. So there were no guns being bought in D.C., no handguns. So finally, because a lawsuit started, the city folded, and then they gave him an office in the police department. So now we have a gun dealer in the police department. That's Sykes. But the police won't tell you about him. They'll just come in and talk to you about Sykes. They don't tell you where his office is. They don't tell you who he is. They don't tell you how to contact him. And for years, they wouldn't give away his business card so you couldn't find him.
Do you believe, and I'm asking this, I'm embarrassed having to ask this, but I have to ask this. Do you believe that people have gotten together and said, look, in a private room, we're going to make this as difficult as possible. When someone comes in, don't tell them about Sykes. Just give them the name. Don't tell them about Step 16. Just leave it out. And we're going to go to the trick question. This would be a good time to go to the trick question. Is this a conspiracy?
Well, as I got close to finishing my book, I realized as I thought about it, it's because I talk so much about the officers in the registry office as being total morons and saying the stupidest things all the time, like the one who told me you can't stop for gas when transporting a gun. You had to stop on the side of the road and call someone to bring you gas, like stupid things, that I was making the whole force sound stupid when it really was these groups of people. So I talked to the head of police union in D.C., who I talked to a lot, Chris Bauman, and I said, Chris, I'm afraid that I'm making the whole force look as idiotic as these guys. Can you talk to your guys and tell me what you think of the guys in the registration office versus you? Because one thing we know in this country, when it comes to gun control, the police the operation did a poll this year, 15,000 officers, overwhelming opposition to gun control laws. All of Obama's agenda was polled, 96% against high-capacity magazines, 94% against assault weapons ban, 84% against the universal background check. So it wasn't clicking to me, and I wanted the readers to understand the difference between who supports gun control laws. And Chris came back to me. He talked to some of his fellow officers, and he said that from their understanding, what happens is the chief, who's appointed by this liberal city council and others, deliberately put people in this registry office who have no information, who don't know the laws, who don't know the process, and they give them no resources. And he didn't say this because he's the union leader, so he won't, but I also think it's like the worst cops available who don't want to be out there doing real business. They just want to be stuck behind a desk. And so that he believes that they are put in there so that people like me are faced with these barriers.
Low information cops, Emily?
Yeah, low information, low intelligence people, and so you can never get the right information. That's why you have to come back so many times.
All right, this is why this is so critical. And I'm actually going to go backwards to chapter 13, to previous paragraphs to the quote that I just read, because this is why this is so vital, listeners. This is please pay attention to this. And quoting again from the book, chapter 13, paragraph 1 and 2. Now that I had purchased and transferred it, I had the serial number so I could proceed with steps 8 through 14 on my registration to-do list. That's not all the steps, by the way. Step 8 was to take and pass a written test. There is no other constitutional right that requires American citizens to pass tests to exercise it. As a newspaper journalist, no one asked me to take a written test before utilizing my First Amendment right to free speech. And I think, again, out of so many important statements that you make and bring to the forefront in this book, that, again, is ranks right up there in the top 5.
It's shocking what gun control has gotten so out of control in so many places. And Chicago is the same as D.C., and so is New York. I mean, it's not the only thing that makes D.C. worse than everywhere else is that we don't have the right to bear at all.
Right, and at least you can get permits in the state of New York. The city is different. So why do Obama and the other gun grabbers want to make the rest of the country into a place like D.C., where there are exasperating, costly, and irrational barriers to getting a gun? They want to disarm the populace and have more control of the citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the last paragraph of Chapter 11. Emily Miller, welcome back to the show. And as a writer myself, that segue into Chapter 12 was brilliant because Chapter 12 is titled The Bloomberg Factor. Let's go there.
Thank you.
I'm sure you probably thought about that when you put those two together. That didn't happen by chance, but it was
right.
absolutely beautiful how you rolled
and,
that together.
Transitioning obviously just so people understand the big picture and what it really means to real Americans. But, Mike Bloomberg, I can't under-explain what a difference he has made in the gun-grabbing effort. It is everything. I mean, nothing that Obama is trying to do would have gotten as far as it has this year, with 5 states passing gun control laws or 27 now executive actions, if it weren't for this billionaire able to throw around so much money. And he's leaving office soon, and this is going to be his sole focus. And he is just trying to buy votes to bring this gun control laws back to the Senate so they can finally get their 60 votes. He's pressuring them. A lot of people are wasting a lot of money to fight it. I mean, look what happened in Colorado. Bloomberg didn't win, but the NRA and a lot of other groups and the Republican Party out there had to spend so much of their money that they'd want to spend in 2014 just to fight Bloomberg. His money is very effective.
Yeah, and he's very dangerous. You open up Chapter 12 with New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is a very successful businessman who thinks his wealth and success give him the right to be the country's nanny. Well-spoken. Couldn't have said that any better myself because that is now I could throw a few choice words in there myself, but it would have to be a satellite radio moment, and I can't do that where we are now. Suffice to say, let's move this to Colorado. I'm glad you moved it in that direction again. Are we losing this debate in the media when we hear words like common sense, where the left hijacks common sense terms? Because common sense to me and to you and anybody who thinks rather than feels is not putting a sign up that says no guns are allowed in this school. Common sense says the sign should read, if you attempt to harm our children, you're going to die in the process. That's a deterrent. So are we losing this debate, Emily, in the media?
In the media, yes, I do think so. I mean, I think besides Bloomberg's money, Barack Obama's greatest ally is the liberal press. I mean, and you read that part of my book where I explain things like editorials where they write 6,000 bullets and the person had an arsenal.
Right.
They use for a high-powered rifle. What makes it a high-powered ammunition?
Right.
They use assault weapons and don't put quotation marks around it. I mean, this media. I think it's 2 reasons. I think one is that whole old-school fashion of it bleeds, it leads. They love death. They love, it leads their shows. They think it's really, gets a lot of ratings. And I think that's a lot of the Piers Morgan factor is the ratings for that part. But then also is so much of the media is isolated in New York City and D.C. and maybe L.A., and they really have no experience with gun owners or gun ownership. It's just so not part of their elitist world. And so that's why you see the media do things like when Obama puts out this photo of him shooting skeet.
You're chuckling when you say that. I know you got a kick out of it.
I don't know what he was doing, but they all were. I mean, as I read my book, half the stories, even the AP writes that he's shooting with a rifle.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine trying to shoot a skeet with a rifle?
Right. Yeah. Again, this is by design, and listeners who know me well enough know my disdain for the media, and that I believe that the liberal media is probably the most dangerous entity we face in this country, more dangerous than Bloomberg and his money, and more dangerous than this administration. Let's go quickly to Piers Morgan. You mentioned him. You did an amazing job on his show. I watched the clip multiple times, and I sat transfixed. And I have to ask you this. I'm going to challenge you here.
Okay.
Piers Morgan wouldn't have ratings if you weren't on that show. I sat and I watched Ted Nugent on the show, and I cringed, and I thought to myself, are we giving this loudmouth more credibility than he has deserved? He certainly hasn't earned it. He is not interested in having an honest debate with you. He's interested in making you look silly. And is your appearance simply giving this man, who would probably just blow away in the wind, more credibility and upping his ratings than he deserves?
I see your point, and definitely he's got viewers. If somebody like me or Ted or anyone else who's, pro-Second Amendment on, our people might actually watch his show, which otherwise nobody would. It's third-rated, and so I do think about that. But more importantly is we pro-Second Amendment people can preach to our choirs.
Right.
My readers, the Washington Times, Fox News, which is so pro-Second Amendment. But if I'm ever going to get the facts across to people who aren't getting that information in the liberal media, I have to go on the liberal media. And you saw on the show where he threw out there, without even pausing, the more guns there are, Emily, the more gun crimes there are.
Yeah, well, you shredded him. You shredded him instantly with that, and I'll tell you what he did, as you know.
That's the kind of thing that with someone else who's like of his mindset is on the show, he can just say that, and
right.
Nobody stops him and says, no, actually, the more guns we've had in the United States, the less gun crime we've had. That is a fact. And like you said earlier, thinking or feeling, he only feels. Right. And he only does this drama thing. But you've got to get on there at least to clarify for the people who are watching those basic facts.
I wish you would have handed him a napkin, because the hypocrisy drips from his face and his microphone every time he opens his mouth. Let's go back to Colorado quickly. The national press, the mainstream media, claimed that Colorado, and they wanted to do this, they did, they were trying to make Colorado a referendum nationally on gun control. And I made the comments on my show last week, that's not the case. This is a Colorado issue. Coloradans will take care of this. The mainstream media wants this to be a national referendum. Now that they've been so slapped around with this, where are they? Okay.
Suddenly it's not a referendum.
Suddenly it's not a national referendum. So let's make this a national referendum. Here's my take. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. Run on this in 2014 and run on this in 2016. I dare you. I don't know of any national election that's been won on gun control. Do you?
Never. It's a killer. It's an absolute killer. And that's why Obama didn't mention it in his first term. And he didn't mention it on the campaign trail. He only mentioned after he got elected. And you saw Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado today suddenly is saying, maybe I shouldn't have passed those gun control laws. And it was such a victory for the American people that they, Democrat districts recalled for the first time in history 2 elected statewide office holders and the Democratic Senate Majority Leader. It was a referendum. It did show that Bloomberg's money, he outspent the other side 5-1, can't buy votes. But still, as I said earlier, these people are stuck with these horrible laws that even their governor who signed them is now saying isn't going to do anything to stop crime and isn't really worth it. It's
a first step in the process. And the second step in the process in Colorado, of course, is the sheriffs suing and so forth.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
They're going to see some changes in those laws. Colorado will be talking directly to you with Nick Andrasik here in the next hour. And hats off to you. Emily, let's go back to your book. Listen, this is number 1 in the shooting category in Amazon. Well-deserved. Incredible job with this. I was waiting with bated breath. I couldn't wait to see what you were going to put in here. I had an idea, and you did just an absolutely phenomenal job. People can pick it up everywhere books are sold, right?
Yes, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, any of those stores. And, Mark, I can't tell you how much your show means to me and your support means to me. And you are our voice on the radio, and I'm so grateful to you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I got to tell you, we couldn't do it without support from people like you, and it means so much for you to get up there and to be such a voice of reason in the face of these individuals who you have to deal with every single day in your job at the Washington Times, and nobody does it better. Emily gets her gun, and make sure you read her column in the Washington Times every single day. Nobody does it better. Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.